Mark from the States, Mark from the States, it's Mark from the United States.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Mark from the States. How we doing today? I am doing fantastic. I hope you are as well. Thank you so much for coming. I've got a couch right here. It's big, it's fake. I want to ask if you'd all come and join me and learn something today. This video has come request. This is from the channel Battle Guide. And Linus over there, he's a wonderful human. He is, of course, gracious enough to allow us to learn and see new things from his channel. His videos are incredible. Those of you who watch his stuff or have seen it on our channel know how excellent of these little mini documentaries are. It's a topic that I'm not too familiar with. Waterloo, Napoleonic Wars, the whole bit. So I'm expecting to get a lot of information today that I'm not aware of. Hopefully you'll find some value as well, and maybe something you didn't know. So that's the goal, is to learn. But before we do, I really encourage you. There's a couple links below. One to his channel and one to this video. Please get over there and support Battle Guide and like, subscribe. If you got one subscription and one like to give today, please, not on our channel, do it on Battle Guide. They deserve it. The videos are just incredible. So the title of the video is The Battle of Waterloo: How a Farmhouse Ended an Empire. So come sit with me. Let's learn something today. I hope everybody's doing well. I'm doing pretty good. It's Friday as of this recording, February 14th, 13th. Oh, it's 14th. Today is Valentine's Day. Oh my God. It's a good thing I already went and got a card. Today is February 14th. Yesterday was my mother's birthday, February 13th. 86 years old. Amazing. Yeah, I can't believe I forgot that today is Valentine's Day already. Wonderful. Okay. Let's get into today's video and learn something. Let's do it.
With 40 men at his back, a giant axe-wielding Frenchman charged at this gate. His name was Sous-Lieutenant Legros, but his soldiers called him l'Enfonceur, the Smasher. Just after midday on the 18th of June 1815, Legros led an assault on the main gate of Hougoumont Farmhouse on the battlefield.
It's cool that it's still there.
Down red-coated guardsmen and hacking into the large oak gate, desperately being pushed closed from within. What followed was one of the bloodiest and most brutal episodes of the battle that day, with the Duke of Wellington himself later declaring that
somebody
the
I'm
success
familiar
of the
with.
battle turned upon the closing of the gates at Hougoumont. But why exactly was it a defining moment? What was at stake, and how did that fight unfold? In this video, using the latest technology, veteran testimony, a previously unseen 3D reconstruction of the battleground, and the latest archaeological evidence, we'll explore the story of the battle for Hougoumont.
Hougoumont.
By 1814, Napoleon Bonaparte, who had once dominated some 50 million Europeans and who had set Europe ablaze in years of conflict, ruled only a toy state in exile on the Isle of Elba. However, on the 26th of February 1815, while the British and French Royalist Guard ships were away, he slipped aboard the French brig L'Inconstant and sailed back to France, landing at Golfe near Monaco and shouting, "Hail France, land of heroes." Within just 20 days, the Bourbon monarchy had fled, and Napoleon Bonaparte was carried into the Paris Tuileries on the shoulders of his men at the head of an army, an emperor once more. Meanwhile, the Allied leaders and their representatives, including the Duke of Wellington, have been discussing the fate of post-Napoleonic Europe at the Congress of Vienna. With Napoleon's shock return, the Congress was disbanded and plans put in place to head off the new threat. An Anglo-Dutch army, 74,000 strong, led by Wellington, started gathering at Belgian Netherlands, centered on Brussels. Marshal Blucher and his Prussian army mobilized around 99,000 men to their south, while the Austrians and Russians scrambled to bring their forces forward from further afield. The Allied plan was to spend 3.5 months gathering and training before invading France on the 1st of July, but Le Petit Caporal had other ideas. On arriving in Paris, Napoleon immediately called up his veterans and, under a cloak of secrecy, managed to assemble some 124,000 troops west of the River Meuse, poised to strike across the border into the Belgian Netherlands around Charleroi. Stealing the initiative at 3:30 in the morning on the 15th of June, Napoleon's Army of the North crossed the border intent on forcing the Prussians and Anglo-Dutch apart and defeating them piecemeal before they could unite and bring their superior numbers to bear. When Wellington heard the news, he was away with his officers attending the Duchess of Richmond's ball in Brussels.
Oh no.
After studying a map in an adjoining room, he exclaimed, "Napoleon has humbugged me, by God. He's gained 24 hours' march on me." On the 16th of June, as Wellington's staff dispatched riders across the Belgian countryside to mobilise the Allied divisions, the French army advanced to contact against the Prussians, who fell back to an area near the village of Ligny. Here a windmill stood witness over what was about to become an infamous killing ground. Taking the right wing of his army with him, Napoleon defeated the larger Prussian force in a to-and-fro bludgeoning match that left some 25,000 dead and wounded littered across the battlefield. Ligny was a tactical French victory, but the better part of the Prussian army was able to withdraw intact to fight again. And knowing this posed a significant threat, Napoleon sent an entire corps of 30,000 men under Marshal Grouchy in chase. Meanwhile, to the west, to prevent Wellington linking up with the Prussians, the French left wing, commanded by Marshal Ney, was sent to capture the crossroads at Quatre Bras. But Ney attacked too late in the day, by which time Wellington's British troops had arrived to bolster the Dutch troops holding the crossroads. In the hours to come, a brutal back-and-forth fight would develop, which saw positions lost and gained at much cost. But the Allied line held, and by nightfall, Wellington's forces were largely assembled, and the advantage had been lost.
Wow, a lot to take in already. This is a great picture here. In fact, I think I want to do a screenshot here. Make this my thumbnail. So bear with me here, please. Perfect. Pretty wild to think that he's, in exile, and he just sneaks out and then just travels back to Paris. Gets on a boat, hides out, lands, and then catches a ride back to Paris, and it's just pretty wild. I mean, all they needed was a lock. I know it's not that, but just imagine the what ifs. I love the what ifs of history. But no, just fascinating. And then it just picks up right where it left off. It's interesting.
On the morning of the 17th of June, Wellington learned that Blucher had pulled back towards Wavre, and he decided to fall back, crucially within reach of Prussian support, and make his own stand on a ridge to the south of a little-known town called Waterloo. Let's look at the position Wellington chose to make his stand. While the ground around Waterloo has changed considerably in the last 2 centuries, we can still get an appreciation of the compactness of the battlefield. In effect, a box, just 1 mile deep and 2 miles wide, within which some 200,000 combatants and 60,000 horses would be engaged. The west-east running Mont Saint-Jean ridgeline, seen here, while not high and today marked by the enormous Butte de Lyon memorial to the Prince of Orange, still dominated the rolling flat farmland around Waterloo and crucially had a sunken track running across its crest. Along here were placed the bulk of Wellington's forces, totaling some 70,000 men. East of this ridgeline was broken country of woodland, shrub and sunken lanes with a few farm buildings. This was the direction from which Blucher would come if he could. Bisecting the ridge in the centre of the operation was the main cobbled Charleroi-Brussels high road, running north to south. This road ran from Brussels to the Allied rear, south past the sandpit and the large La Haye-Saint farm complex before reaching La Belle Alliance, an inn where Napoleon would establish his headquarters and his centre. The distance from the ridgeline to La Belle Alliance is just over 1 kilometre. The shallow valley between the opposing armies was covered by fields of corn and rye. This crop, which was an ancient strain, would have stood around 6 feet high and was planted in sticky clay soil, currently getting the soaking of the summer. To our right, the ground then sloped down from the ridge to the modest Hougoumont farm chateau complex, where our drama unfolds. But let's look at the dispositions of the opposing armies. Napoleon had 2 corps, d'Erlans on his right and Reyes on his left, in front of Hougoumont. In reserve, he had the Imperial Guard, and to the rear were 2 corps of cavalry. His grand battery, including his 12-pounder beautiful daughters, were massed to the east of the Alliance. Wellington arrayed the better part of his 5 infantry divisions along the reverse slope of the Mont Saint-Jean ridge to protect them from the French guns, and spread his own guns along his entire frontage. He had 2 brigades of heavy cavalry to the rear and light cavalry protecting its flanks. But crucial to the fate of the Allies at Waterloo was how he anchored the position on 3 strong points. Let's take a look. Frischemont and Papelotte on his left were chateau farmhouses, easily defended in the broken wooded country. They were occupied and fortified by Dutch Nassau troops and saw heavy fighting toward the end of the day. La Haye-Saint in the centre, and 150 metres forward of the ridge, was right in the middle of some of the most dramatic action of the day. This was held by the King's German Legion with support from the 95th Rifles in the sandpit. Then, around 200 metres forward of the ridge, and our focus for the fight to come, was Hougoumont, right here, guarding Wellington's right flank.
The whole thing is kind of mind-boggling, the amount of humans in the scale of all these soldiers in the battle itself, and all the different objectives and so on. And for them to be able to communicate with one another always seems to fascinate me. Whether it's flags, drums, messenger. It's just so. It's hard to kind of grasp how anything worked as you planned. You're getting information second, third hand most of the time, if not all the time. So and I know we've seen other videos where the history was changed because of the information not being able to be presented exactly how it was intended. Whether it's like orders and objectives and so on. But it's fascinating.
Chateau Hougoumont, or historically Gaumont, by June 1815, comprised 12 buildings and outhouses built around 2 inner courtyards. An upper courtyard with the south gate and a lower courtyard with the north gate, which led back to the Mont Saint-Jean ridgeline. Passing through the north gate, we enter the lower courtyard and see ahead of us the 3-storey chateau building and stone walls of the great barn to our right. Continuing through the small gate separating the upper and lower courtyards, we can see the south gate and gardener's residence to our front, and turning left, to the rear of the chateau, the small attached chapel. Beyond that, and moving eastwards, we pass through the upper courtyard's garden gate to enter the formal garden, which was complete with plant bedding, stone balustrades, and bordered by a 9 to 10 foot high red brick wall. Turning now to this 1816 historic map overlaid on the modern satellite, which pinpoints the kitchen gardens numbered 5 and 6, the formal garden marked 8, we can understand the rest of the complex in context. Here to the east we find a large orchard numbered 9, which was about 3 acres in size. Bordering this was a thick hawthorn hedge and internal ditch providing cover for the defenders. To its south, numbered 1 and 2, were a pair of meadows, alongside which, and number 3, was a large wood, screening the chateau completely from the French corps waiting just 1 kilometre away. This was a 250 by 350 metre wood of mature oak and chestnut trees, again bordered by thick hedges. Today, just 2 chestnuts remain, only one of which is still living, and both are riddled by 200-year-old musket balls. Crucially, between the north edge of the wood and the south wall of the formal garden was a younger orchard, numbered 10, forming an open gap 30 metres wide which has come to be known as the Killing Ground, and to which we'll return. But what about those who found themselves here as the battle drew closer? Let's meet a few. Firstly, there was Lieutenant Colonel James MacDonald of the 2nd Foot Guards, now known as the Coldstream Guards. He was the 34-year-old commanding officer charged with the defence of the chateau. A giant of a man, son of a clan chief and veteran of the Peninsular Wars, he'd already received an Army Gold Medal for battalion command. At the start of the battle, MacDonald was commanding all 4 light companies of the 1st Division. Next, there's Guardsman Matthew Clay. He was 19 at Waterloo, hailed from Nottinghamshire, and had joined the 3rd Foot Guards, now the Scots Guards, the year before. Standing at only 5'6", he was considered small and placed in his battalion's light company as a result. Finally, on the Allied side, there was Nassauer Private Johann Peter Leonard, one of the few combatants at Waterloo to ever be photographed. He too was sent in to defend Hougoumont with his 800-man battalion. These were German troops who served under Napoleon but switched sides in 1813 to end up in the Dutch army by 1815. The Nassau troops, who originally deployed forward into the wood and into the orchard, ended up fighting shoulder to shoulder with British guardsmen. As well as the Dutch, some 200 Hanoverian Jaegers were also in the woods as skirmishers at the start of the battle. 1 kilometre away across the battlefield was 19-year-old Private Lerguy de Sivereau of the 93rd Régiment de Ligne, part of General Rey's 2nd Corps, and one of 13,000 Frenchmen to assault the Allied position at Hougoumont. So as our protagonists shiver, slip and shake themselves into wakefulness on the morning of the 18th of June, let's visit Guardsman Matthew Clay as he prepares for the impending battle. When daylight appeared, all being quiet on Sunday morning, we procured some fuel from the farm at Hougoumont, then lighted fires and warmed ourselves, our limbs being very much cramped from sitting on the side of the wet ditch the whole night. The sergeant of each section gave a small piece of bread to each man, and an inquiry was made along the ranks for a butcher. One having gone forward, he was immediately ordered to kill a pig, a portion of the head, in its rough state, being my share. My portion of meat, which having become warmed through and blackened with smoke, I partook of a little, but finding it too raw and unsavoury, I put the remainder in my haversack, and taking my musket to put it in order for action, I discharged its contents. Very quickly, defensive preparations were underway with loopholes, some of which still remain to this day, made in wood by knocking out bricks with bayonets, holes hacked in building roofs, and items piled against walls to create makeshift fire steps. The French too were preparing. Napoleon himself had a clear plan of attack, to go straight up the middle, along the Brussels high road in a hammer blow to brush the Allies off the ridge before marching on Brussels. But to achieve victory, he knew he needed to weaken Wellington's centre. He decided to do this in 2 ways. First, after the morning sun had hardened the wet ground, the Grand Battery would open up and smash apart the red-coated battalions on the ridge. Secondly, he would launch a feint or distraction on Wellington's vulnerable right flank at Hougoumont, forcing the Duke to send troops from the ridge down to the chateau, thus weakening the Allied centre. So it was. The Battle of Waterloo began around 11:30 that morning, with General Rey ordering one of his division commanders, the Emperor's brother, Prince Jerome Bonaparte, to lead a diversionary assault on Hougoumont. As soon as Jerome's troops began forming up, the British gunners on the ridge touched slow matches to touch hold, and 15 9-pound balls screamed across the field. Private de Sivereau recalled the effect. The English batteries opened a lively fire which knocked over 20 men of the 2nd Battalion, and more balls followed so rapidly. Our true courage was put to the test, and it's very trying to wait for death in such circumstances. The most complete inaction, surrounded by death and horribly mutilated bodies. As the first 2 French battalions marched forward to the sound of their drummer boys beating the pas de charge, All they could see ahead were the thick woods and the roof of the chateau. When the French entered the woods, the Nassau and Hanoverian skirmishers started picking off officers and men as they pepper-potted from tree to tree back to the formal garden. It took about an hour for the attackers to get through the woods, by which time 6 British howitzers had added their own fire, shredding branches, obliterating trees and sending jagged splinters through the air. Those unscathed by shot, shells, splinters and musket fire now stumbled through a thick hawthorn hedge into a new hell. They'd reached the killing ground. Private Leonard witnessed the moment. We had scarcely taken up position at the loopholes when masses of French came from the wood, all intent on capturing the farm, but they were too late. The shower of balls that we loosed off on the French was so terrible that the grass was soon covered with French corpses. The killing ground is that 30-metre gap between the formal garden's southern wall and the north edge of the wood. It was completely open and covered by the muskets of Nassau troops and guardsmen. Even with the relatively slow loading time of the musket, the French were helpless without ladders. From loopholes, windows and wall tops, muskets spat a murderous spray of lead into the packed mass of Frenchmen attempting to cross and scale the walls. Thanks to the archaeological excavations of the Waterloo Uncovered Veterans Charity, we know where the main attack took place. A vast quantity of musket balls show that about 2/3 of the way along the wall the fighting was fiercest, where it seems likely there was a small gate from the wood through which the French rushed straight at the wall to their front.
Allied French. Wow. That's insane. They're able to identify what musket ball hit the wall. Jeez.
In this first wave alone, bodies started piling up at the base of the wall and wounded men cried out to be put out of their misery. One of the dead in the first hour of the battle was General Pierre Baudouin, the man leading the brigade making the initial assault. A plaque still marks the spot where he fell. As Frenchmen continued to throw themselves at the garden wall, evidence suggests another group broke into the orchard and engaged the Nassau troops in fierce hand-to-hand fighting, with recovered musket balls highlighting the ferocity of the fight. Ultimately, the weight of French numbers simply overwhelmed the Dutch, causing them to fall back to the sunken lane to the north of the orchard. Seeing this, Lord Saltoun and his 2 light companies of the 1st Foot Guards, now the Grenadier Guards, were sent down off the ridge to retake the orchard. The legend tells of Wellington sending them in himself with the words, "There, my lads, in with you and let me see no more of you." The guards then poured in from the ridge and flushed the French out, scouring them from the orchard. The first French assault had failed. At around midday, while Napoleon's Grand Battery continued hammering the main Allied positions along the ridge, Jerome attempted a second assault on Hougoumont with a fresh brigade. What was intended to be a diversionary feint was now quickly becoming a main effort for Rey's corps. As the new attackers, including the imposing Sous-Lieutenant Legros, pushed up to the southwest corner of the chateau complex, they fought through the kitchen garden, and L'Enfonceur saw an opportunity. Shouting for men to follow him and wielding a pioneer's axe, he and 40 men rushed after a group of withdrawing guardsmen around to the north gate and managed to break in. The ferocity of Legros' attack was rapidly clearing the lower courtyard. If more French troops followed through the gate, the defenders faced being gutted from the inside.
Oh no.
Overlooking the unfolding tragedy were guardsmen posted in the upper floors of the chateau house itself. As they saw the jeopardy, they shouted across to those at the south-facing windows so they could alert Colonel MacDonald below at the formal garden gate. Immediately, MacDonald, with a number of officers and guardsmen, rushed from the upper to lower courtyard and into the chaos of Legros' attack. MacDonald instantly recognised that the greater threat to Hougoumont was not Legros and his men, but the open gate. With the help of the massive Sergeant James Graham and Captain Henry Wyndham, he led a small group past the intruders and heaved the gate shut, barring them as Legros and his men contended with
I was expecting that.
windows above that had turned the courtyard into a killing trap. With the gates closed, MacDonald and his men turned and under a hail of blows dispatched Legros and every single one of the attackers, save a young French drummer boy. Matthew Clay described the scene in the courtyard after the assault. The gates were riddled with shot holes. In its entrance lay many dead bodies of the enemy. One which I particularly noticed appeared to be a French officer, but they were scarcely distinguishable, being to all appearances as though they'd been very much trodden upon and covered with mud. By 1 p.m., the second wave had
It's
failed,
nice.
and Jerome's division
Memorial.
was now becoming a spent force. 7,500 Frenchmen were facing 1,850 Allied troops at Hougoumont. It was around this point that Napoleon decided to order his main attack at Wellington's centre, ordering d'Erlon's corps of 20,000 men up the slope at the Allied thin red line. As the columns reached the ridge, they were hurled back by a devastating British heavy cavalry charge, which resulted in the capture of 2 Imperial Eagles. But this would have been all unknown to the defenders of Hougoumont. Between 2 and 3 p.m., General Rey ordered a fresh division under General Foy to support Jerome's battered troops. 13,000 men were now enveloping the position. The bulk of Foy's fresh troops marched up on the right and attacked the orchard. In response, the remainder of the 2nd Battalion 3rd Guards was ordered down from the ridge to face them. Their discipline and rapid rate of fire soon stemmed the flood, and in their furious bayonet charge turned it back. Private de Civreux described the struggle. We were mown down by the English and Scottish fusillade from their formidable positions. Soon we had our feet bathed in blood. In less than half an hour, our ranks were reduced by more than half. The British, Dutch and German soldiers at Hougoumont had by now managed to hold on to their redoubt for 4 hours, outnumbered by at least 4 to 1. But finally, understanding the futility of infantry assaults on a fortified position, General Rey now sent artillery forward. A 6-pounder loaded with canister shot, in effect acting as a giant shotgun, was dragged up to the south of the orchard, facing the defenders back to the sunken lane to its north, while a full battery of 12-pounders was established to the west. This also included 2 deadly howitzers, able to lob explosive shells over the chateau wall into the midst of the building complex. Not long after these guns opened up, fires broke out across the buildings, adding to the smoke and dust drifting across the battlefield. The situation at Hougoumont was becoming desperate, and Wellington recognised this, sending a scrawled message on arskin to MacDonald.
You know, honestly, I'm surprised they didn't do that first. You know, soften it up with cannon fire. I'm not a military strategist, so this is coming from a place of ignorance. But I don't know, maybe they didn't think it would be that difficult, obviously. But yeah, it's bayonets. There's just something about that just makes me shiver. Hearing, fixed bayonets, bayonet charge, just the thought of being punctured by a bayonet is just horrifying. And it makes me, listening to the story tells you how good Battle Guide is at recounting in these documentaries. I'm hands getting clammy, on the edge of my seat, wondering, unlike probably many of you, I don't know the outcome of this particular event. So this is new to me. And it's pretty amazing. A lot of it is still there, even after. I'm sure some of it's been rebuilt, obviously. But seeing those walls, pretty impressive. Wow.
I see that the fire has communicated itself on the haystack to the roof of the chateau. You must, however, still keep your men in the parts to which the fire does not reach. Take care that no men are lost by the falling in of roofs or floors. After they have fallen in, occupy the ruined walls inside of the garden, particularly if it should be possible for the enemy to pass through the embers to the inside of the house. By now, over 700 of MacDonald's original command have been wounded, 200 of them grievously. These men were laid out in the great barn, receiving what rudimentary aid was available. As fire spread through the lower courtyard, the barn and chateau both caught fire, and unable to move, wounded men were burned alive where they were. Horses, terrified by the smoke and fire, ran out into the courtyard. But the carnage and artillery fire was so bad that at least one horse ran back into the stables to die in the Inferno. As more buildings caught fire, officers placed themselves at room entrances, forcing men to hold and fight at their smouldering positions until the very last possible moment. Sergeant James Graham shocked MacDonald by asking to leave his post after his heroic action closing the gate. When quizzed, he admitted that he wanted to save his injured brother, who was lying wounded in the great barn. He succeeded in getting him out just in time. Many others were not so lucky. The wounded in the chapel also had a close shave. The fire from the adjoining chateau was licking under the door, but as soon as it reached the feet of Christ on a wooden crucifix, it suddenly abated.
That's wonderful. Well, you gotta believe, right? You gotta believe. Wow. Heartbreaking, though, to hear about. Just.
Many believed themselves saved by divine intervention. The crucifix still hangs in the chapel, and you can see the scorch marks.
Wow.
Remarkably, despite the utterly desperate situation inside the farm, the French still failed to break in. Musket and cannon fire died down, and a stalemate fell. At the orchard, Lord Saltoun's men from the 1st Guards handed the northern edge over to the 3rd Guards. In 2 hours, he had lost half his officers and a third of his men. They pulled back to the divisional position on the ridge, essentially combat ineffective. It was around this time that a staff officer received word on the ridge that the defenders of Hougoumont were running out of ammunition, a predicament that at La Haye-Sainte had led to its capture by the French in due course. The staff officer noted Private Joshua Brewer, or possibly Brewster, of the Royal Wagon Train nearby, and directed him down to the chateau. In the words of the staff officer, he gallantly started his horses and drove straight down the hill to the farm, to the gate of which I saw him arrive. He must have lost his horses, as there was a severe fire kept on him. I feel convinced that to that man's service, the guards owe their ammunition. Brewster's action was absolutely crucial. While French artillery and musket fire continued on into the afternoon, inflicting a steady rate of casualties, the fact that the defenders could still fire back meant that no further mass assault on the chateau was launched for the remainder of the battle. Frey's corps was a spent force, having wasted its energy washing up on the walls and hedges of Hougoumont. Unfolding across the wider battlefield now were the mass charges of French cavalry, which were broken up by the Allied squares, and then, as the Prussian army arrived from the east, the final, ultimately doomed assault by the Imperial Guard. At 8:30 p.m., with that assault turned back on the ridge of Mont Saint-Jean and the Allied general advance order, a messenger was sent to Hougoumont telling the defenders there to advance with the rest of the army.
Whoa.
Those that could, despite shattering exhaustion, duly obeyed, clearing the woods to their front of the last few exhausted and dejected Frenchmen, before returning to the ridge they had fought so hard to protect, and assembling what was left of their number for a tragically short roll call. It's impossible, with the scale of slaughter at Waterloo, to know the real butcher's bill for Hougoumont. Different authorities put Allied casualties at 850 to 1,700, and French casualties between 5,000 and 6,000.
Oh.
What is known, and was well remembered by those who were there, was that as darkness fell over the field, the cries of wounded and dying echoed through the night.
Ugh.
Matthew Clay, exhausted and hungry at the end of the day, paused to eat. On again going into the yard, it being evening, and perceiving a clear glowing fire rising from the ruins of a stable or some other outhouse, I took the opportunity of cooking the remaining portion of pork which I had stored away in my haversack, and after having placed it upon a fire and quietly awaiting its being cooked, discovered that the glow of fire arose from the half-consumed body of some party who'd fallen in the contest. My meat, which was unsavoury in the morning, became much more so by its redressing. a visitor to the area of Hougoumont 10 days after the fire recalled the funeral pyres around the chateau grounds.
Awful.
The pyres had been burning for 8 days, and by then the fire was being fed solely by human fat. There were thighs, arms, and legs piled up in a heap, and some 50 workmen, with handkerchiefs over their noses, were raking the fire and the bones with long forks. As the smoke rose over Waterloo in the days after the battle, the survivors from Hougoumont wouldn't have known that the fate of Europe for 100 years had been shaped by their actions defending these walls. But theirs is but one part of the story. We'll return to Waterloo again soon to march and ride on other corners of the battlefield. Thanks for watching. If you
That
enjoyed
was
this
excellent.
video, why don't you check out our other Napoleonic Wars content right here on YouTube, including the infamous
Excellent.
Siege of Badajoz. We want to add special thanks to Clearbreeze Consulting, whose 3D rendering of Hougoumont Farm made this video possible. Finally, thanks to Waterloo Uncovered, a charity that combines world-class archaeology on the battlefield of Waterloo with the recovery and well-being of veterans and serving military personnel.
That was awesome. As always, his videos are so good. So good. Oh, man, just what carnage the fighting was back then, and what we look as primitive, weapons of war now, of course, were state of the art back then. But just, I'll tell you what, the thought of, and I may have mentioned this already, but just the thought of bayonets, bayonets, bayonet charge, whatever, just, it's horrifying, the thought. And it just gives me shivers thinking about that last resort kind of thing. And no, thank you. I hope you enjoyed that. Hope you learned something today. Hope there's something about this that you didn't know. There are a lot of you who are very, very knowledgeable on this sort of thing, and I'm sure I'll get a lot of added context to this event. But hopefully there's still some things there that you're able to take away from this. If you don't know the channel, get over there, support him, please. I'm always left kind of dumbfounded in a way on how he's able to just bring it to life like that. It's just, he's truly very, very, very good at what he does. So get over there and support him, please. I hope everybody's happy, healthy, and safe. Thank you so much for putting up with my wow. That's just, a default statement that comes out when I see something that's just like, wow. I can't help it. So I apologize for the wows, but it does not take away the sentiment. It does not. Hope everybody's having a great day. We will see you soon. Have a great weekend if I don't see you. And take care. All right. Bye-bye.
Mark from the States, Mark from the States, it's Mark. Yeah.